Good morning, students. This is CAMS Swaminathan welcoming you all to the next session in the subject Economics for Finance. Today, the topic for discussion would be from the first chapter, which is titled as Determination of National Income. We would be taking up Unit 2, which deals with the Keynesian theory of determination of national income. Now, as has been the practice in the past, let us briefly try to go through the initial pages of your study material, wherein we would be able to see the topics listed in this particular unit, which is the Keynesian theory of determination of national income. Now, here we go. On the screen in front of you, you would be able to see clearly that there are about 8 different subcomponents involved in this particular unit titled the Keynesian theory of determination of national income. The first one being introduction, then the second one is circular flow in a simple two-sector model. Third one is basic concepts and functions. Then we have two-sector model of national income determination and the investment multiplier. Then determination of equilibrium income in a three-sector model. And then finally determination of equilibrium in a four-sector model. And then the unit is wrapped up by the conclusion. Okay, now let us move on with the detailed contents of the chapter. Now, as we see on the screen in front of us, the title goes as follows: The Keynesian Theory of Determination of National Income. Now, students, I am pretty confident that by now, since you all would have learnt Unit 1, which dealt basically with fundamental concepts involved in national income accounting, we all would definitely know what is the meaning and significance of national income. Now in economics, broadly we have two different components. One is microeconomics, the other is macroeconomics, correct? Now in macroeconomics, national income is basically a part of it, okay? Because when we talk about national income, we are referring to the aggregates and not the individual firm relating data. Okay, we are talking about the economic aggregates. Therefore, it is part of macroeconomics. And Keynesian theory basically has been propounded by J.M. Keynes, who was one of the leading economists at a point in time. Okay, so we are now today trying to understand what was basically the theory proposed by Mr. Keynes, okay, with respect to determination of national income. Now, flipping through the first page, we have a chart where it's nicely depicted. You have determination of national income, down below the Keynesian theory of determination of national income, which has 4 boxes presented to us in the study material. One is two-sector model for national income determination, then the investment multiplier concept, and then determination of equilibrium in a three-sector model, and also with respect to a four-sector model. Okay, now this introduction part is something that I would leave it to you to do it on self-study mode. Okay. All that is important for you to remember from this particular introductory part is this segment which I am reading out for you. The term consumption would indicate what people in an economy plan to consume. Plan to consume is very important, and investment would denote the planned investment. Okay, so the consumption generally takes the form of a household sector related expenditure. Investment relates to the business sector or the firms. If we want to predict what the equilibrium value of output or GDP is, we need to know what quantities of final goods people plan to demand and supply. Okay, so this is what basically is all about this particular unit. Okay, now there is another very important concept that I would like you all to remember, as it helps you to understand the perspective of this unit appropriately. There is a concept known as natural level of real GDP or the natural level of output. Now, what exactly is the meaning of natural level of real GDP or output? Here we go. In your study material, you would be able to see here that the classical economists maintained that the economy is self-regulating and is always capable of automatically achieving equilibrium at the natural level of real GDP or output. Now, what does it mean? It means which is the level of real GDP that is obtained when the economy's resources are fully employed. So basically, natural level of real GDP or output refers to output that is procured at full employment level. Now here again, when we refer to full employment, one should probably be aware of the fact that in any economy, it will not be possible to literally achieve full employment. That is just a theoretical concept. From a practical perspective, the significance of the term full employment will automatically imply that there will definitely be a natural rate of unemployment prevailing in any economy, whatever be it, correct? So we have to be able to live with it. So in an economy, if the workforce is going to be represented by way of 100 people, then it is not possible to ensure that all the 100 would be working. Possibly we can try to achieve maybe a 96% or a 97%. Some element of the total population will certainly be unemployed, come what may. So we know that in any economy there will be a business cycle, correct? Which will mean that there would be a boom cycle as well as the recession related cycle. All of these things generally would be taking place in a cyclical pattern. Now here we find when we move on that with regard to the natural level of real GDP being achieved, it states that in the study material, while circumstances arise from time to time that cause the economy to fall below or to exceed the natural level of real GDP, wage and price flexibility, very important, wage and price flexibility will bring the economy back to the natural level of real GDP. So hypothetically, what it means is that in case there is underemployment, okay, then what happens is, now taking an example, suppose an economy has 100 workforce, out of which only let's assume 75 are working. The balance 25 are not working. Okay, assuming 100% employment is possible for a moment. Then can the industry present a case that since in the economy 25 more people are idle, okay, therefore let us try to cut the wages of the existing employees as we can easily get it substituted by others who are remaining idle. This is what will be the general thought process that we would try to entertain. Hence, here also we find that yes, wage and price flexibility. So it presumes that you will be able to revise the wages downward and therefore actually try to adjust the economy to bring it back on track. Correct? Now, this is one particular area where the approach adopted by Keynes was starkly different from what is mentioned over here in terms of wage and price flexibility. Under the Keynesian approach, the thought process is that wages basically is sticky downwards, meaning you just can't go and reduce the wages of an employee just for some reason. It is not practically possible in a very easy manner, and therefore Keynesian approach is not basically favoring this concept of flexibility. In fact, in your study material a little later, you would definitely have the opportunity to read that statement that wages basically prices are sticky downwards as per Keynesian approach. In fact, let me actually take you through to that segment now itself and highlight to you that point. It is here that you notice, which I read, the economy could settle in equilibrium at any level of unemployment. Keynesians believe that prices and wages are not so flexible. They are sticky, especially downward. Okay, so I hope now the point will be clear to you. Okay. Now, there's another couple of concepts that we need to bear in mind, which is highlighted in the next paragraph. Something pertaining to equilibrium income level and also the potential income. Now, equilibrium income basically refers to that level of national income where the aggregate demand and aggregate supply would basically match, meaning the planned expenditure and the planned output related income would match. We have the firms who are basically manufacturing goods and services. We have the household sector who would be spending the money, correct? And also the business people who would be demanding for investment goods. So there is demand on one hand, there is the output on the other hand, given a particular period of time. For example, production in a particular financial year, starting from April to March. So if the producers expect that whatever would be produced is what would be consumed by the market, then we say that is the equilibrium level. Okay, but then that equilibrium level of income need not essentially match with your potential income. Therefore, it is important for us to understand what is the significance of the term potential income. Potential income basically is something relating to, if an economy has 100 workforce, if all the 100 basically were to work, or assuming practically that the natural rate of unemployment would be 2%, okay, then out of the workforce of 100, 98 are expected to work, correct? Now, if 98 are going to be actively employed, and if the economy can produce 5,000 units of a particular commodity, then that 5,000 units multiplied by the price per unit will represent the total sale value. That would represent the potential income, which is why here it is stated potential income refers to the level of income that the economy is technically capable of producing without generating or accelerating inflation. Okay. So, but in reality, would 98 itself be employed? We don't know. Okay, there are several factors that can impact the number of people who would be employed, and as a corollary, how many would remain unemployed. Okay, so here it is important for us to know that Keynes argued that markets would not automatically lead to full employment equilibrium and the resulting natural level of real GDP. So Keynes was clearly under the impression that markets by themselves would not touch the natural level of real GDP, which means the potential income or the maximum capacity, the optimum capacity that can be produced by the economy would not naturally be achieved by markets. Okay, in other words, what I think he would also be trying to indicate clearly is that markets would strike the equilibrium level of income even much below the full employment level. It is not essential that equilibrium level of national income must only be attained at full employment level only, is what was one of the propositions expounded by Keynes. Okay, now here if we move on and read, the stickiness of prices and wages in the downward direction prevents the economy's resources from being fully employed and thereby prevents the economy from returning to the natural level of real GDP. Now, students, you may probably feel that why are we reading these things quite a bit in detail? It is absolutely critical for you to understand these fundamental components very clearly if you want to be thorough with this particular topic. Now, what exactly is the message that is being communicated through this sentence? Now, we saw a while ago that even though only 75 are employed out of 98, the workable force out of 100, okay, we made an assumption that in an economy 100 people are there. 2% is a natural rate of unemployment, so 98 is a workforce, out of which only 75 are working. So the country, naturally, the government wants to increase the level of employment and reduce the level of unemployment. So they want to actually try and touch the 98 number and not stay at the 75 as the level of employment, right? But then remember that if you want to move up from 75 to 98, there is an excess supply in terms of labor force by 23. Now, whenever supply basically exceeds demand, the prices naturally should fall, is what we would expect. So, can the prices or the wages relating to labor be moved downwards? This is where Keynes makes a presumption that it is sticky downwards. Now, students, we have to bear in mind that, for example, if you were to be employed currently at a salary of 25,000 rupees per month and you are part of the 75 people, okay, and now if the employer is going to tell you that, well, are you willing to take a salary cut of 5,000 and I will make your salary as 20,000? He is saying so because if you refuse to accept, well, there is always another person available in the market who is idle at the moment. Correct? You remember the 23 people who are remaining idle. Now, can you be compelled effectively, okay, to accept the reduction of 5,000? Now, well, if the workforce is going to be homogeneous, then probably yes. But then there are so many factors that will have to be borne in mind when the wage is being determined. Now, if you are one who is going to represent a skilled workforce who has probably good experience, can this be replaced immediately from the market from the unemployed segment? May not be possible. So apparently, though the employer thinks that he might be saving 5,000 rupees by actually checking you out and getting a new person in, it is going to cost him a lot of money in terms of getting that employee trained, correct, and bringing him up to the level of skillfulness that you possessed. Now, if you look at the holistic picture, it might not make sense basically then to actually reduce your wage, right? This is one of the reasons as to why, in my view, Keynes would have held this proposition that wages basically it will be sticky downwards. Okay, so now we note that since this cannot happen, obviously the balance 23, which is 98 folks minus 75 active workforce, cannot be employed as much, correct? So that is why here it is written, the stickiness of prices and wages in the downward direction prevents the economy's resources from being fully employed. So the balance 23 may not be fully employed. Okay, what would be the impact of that? And thereby, this will naturally prevent the economy from returning to the natural level of real GDP. Meaning, if 98 had been employed, then we could have produced 5,000 units, which will now not be possible because from 75, let's assume we have been able to increase the workforce only to 80 numbers. Okay, therefore, still we have 18 who are unemployed. To that extent, the economy's actual output will certainly be below the natural level of real GDP. Okay, that's why it is continued as therefore output will remain at less than full employment level as long as there is insufficient spending in the economy. Now, this is very critical for you to understand that there was insufficient spending. Well, insufficient spending in the economy means that effectively there is deficiency in the effective demand. People are not willing to spend. Now, there could be so many factors that can impact a person's willingness to spend, right? So, if the willingness to spend were to drop, then obviously national income will drop. Now, the other way to look at it will be what would happen if the willingness to spend of the consumer would be increased? Naturally, that will have an impact in terms of increasing the national income. Now, the willingness to spend is what basically, okay, the desire to spend or to make them spend is what is related to a very important concept that you will learn a while later in this unit known as marginal propensity to consume, MPC. So the more and more you can try to impact, increase or enhance your marginal propensity to consume, it will have a higher multiplier effect. Okay, so if you have understood whatever we have been discussing till now, then those concepts which we will be discussing a little later will become quite easy for you to grasp. Okay, now we have the two sector model under the Keynesian approach, which represents the household sector and the business sector. The three sector model consists of the household, the business, and the government sector. Closed economy, not opened up to exports and imports. Okay, and the four sector model is a free economy where you have the household, the business, the government, the foreign sector as well. Now, before we try to launch ourselves into understanding the 2, 3, and 4 sectors in detail, okay, let us just try to understand the circular flow in a simple two sector model. Now here you have a chart, a diagram that has been presented. Let me actually discuss this diagram. It will be fairly simple for you. This will give you a background of whatever has been provided as an explanation above. Okay. So here in a two sector model, we are essentially concerned only with the household sector and the business sector. Okay. The presumption is that all factors of production are being owned by the household sector only. Okay, so if at all the producers want to produce, they will have to hire these factors of production from the household sector. So when they hire the factors of production like land, labor, capital, enterprise, okay, there will be a payment that they will have to make, correct? So when they hire the person. For example, they hire labor or they hire land or capital or entrepreneurship, right? So that's a real flow because you're able to feel you touch the land, you can feel the labor force, etc. That's a real flow. And then in turn, by using the factors of production, the producers, the business is able to produce goods. And when you produce goods, basically, again you can feel them, and hence that is another real flow that takes place. Okay, so factors of production being made available by the household sector to the business sector is a real flow. Okay, and the goods and services produced by the business sector and supplied to the household sector again represents a real flow. Then where is the money flow here? Now when the factors of production are higher, the business sector pays money to the household sector. That represents the money flow, which is the factor payments in your diagram. And the household sector will basically utilize this income that they have earned to do what? To spend it on the goods and services that have been produced for them by the business sector. So that basically the consumption expenditure given in your diagram represents the money flow. So the dotted lines basically the diagram represent real flows, and the unbroken lines basically indicate your money flows. Okay, so apart from this, I would just like to draw your attention to one line, one sentence in your study material here on this page, because that's a very important concept to be used later by us. All investment outlay is autonomous. So autonomous means not, I mean, it's free. It's free in the sense not dependent upon. Okay, not in money terms. Huh? So what does it mean? Investment outlay means investment expenditure. Entire investment expenditure is autonomous, meaning not dependent upon or not determined by either the level of income or the rate of interest. Generally, what do we think? Higher and higher the level of income, higher and higher the investment that can be made. Okay, lower and lower the interest rate of borrowing, higher and higher the investment that would be made because the opportunity cost. Correct. So here, one of the assumptions that is being made is the entire investment outlay is assumed to be autonomous, meaning not impacted by the level of income or the rate of interest. Okay. Now, this is one of the assumptions made specifically because we are dealing also with national income determination in the short run. Okay. Now, hopefully you are clear till now, dear students. So ultimately, we find that in the simple two-sector model, whatever amount of money has been paid by the business sector to the household sector as factor payments represents the disposable income in the hands of the household sector. Why do I say disposable income? Because there is no tax. Correct? Why there is no tax? Because in a two-sector model, there is only the household sector and the business sector, no government sector involved. So there is no tax at all. Correct? So whatever income is earned is disposable income, and the entire disposable income is being spent by way of consumption expenditure. So disposable income is equal to your consumption expenditure, which will be the output as well. So here there is a box given in the study material which is very straightforward. Factor payments is equal to household income, true, which is equal to household expenditure because disposable income, which is household income, okay, is what is being totally spent, meaning nothing will be saved. Okay, since savings is assumed to be zero, basically there will be no leakage from the system. Now, when I say leakage, written here in your study material, what is the meaning of leakage? Whenever suppose Mr. X is going to earn 100 rupees, if he spends the entire 100 rupees on consumption, then the entire 100 rupees remains in circulation in the economy. But if out of the 100 rupees, Mr. X is going to retain a 20 rupee with him in his pocket, that means he is spending only 80 rupees. Only 80 rupees is reaching the hands of other people. So the multiplier effect can be felt or realized only on the basis of rupees 80 and not with respect to the rupees 20, because rupees 20 has been hoarded or has got leaked from the system. Okay, so when we talk about the investment multiplier concept a little later, the concept of leakage and injection will be very relevant to us. Now, whatever I explained to you with respect to leakages and its impact, the opposite will be the case with respect to injections on the multiplier effect. Okay, so coming back to this box, factor payments is equal to household income is equal to household expenditure, which is what will be the total money received by the firms, which will be exactly equal to the value of output produced by them in a particular period of time. Okay. Now, time and again, we are going to be seeing equilibrium aggregate income, equilibrium output. Now, what does the term equilibrium signify? It signifies a position which represents that there is no tendency to change or a position of rest, meaning equilibrium output occurs when the desired amount of output demanded by all the agents in the economy exactly equals the amount produced in a given time period. Okay, so the household sector's plan to spend must be exactly equal to the business sector's plan to produce. That's when, if it matches, we would state that equilibrium level of output has been determined. Okay. Now, here, so when we refer to the desired amount of output, it means the planned level. Okay. There is also another term that we generally use in economics known as ex ante. EXANTE, which means it is something which is being predicted or planned, not based on the actual results. So before the results are known, you try to predict. Okay. That is ex ante. And if you have post ante, that means after the results have been obtained. So ex ante is something that you will have to just remember, as it will be used in your study material a while later. Okay. In fact, I will actually draw your attention immediately to the component of your study material. Here you see on the same page, when we talk about the basic concepts and functions, aggregate demand function. Here you find X ante. Again, twice you are finding X ante, meaning planned. Okay, it is based on some predictions, forecasts. So now, after having understood the working of a simple two-sector model, okay, wherein we saw that there were no leakages, injections, etc. Let us now move ahead with trying to understand some of the basic concepts and functions. One is the aggregate demand function. As I said a while ago, it is important for the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply function, aggregate supply to intersect to help us determine the equilibrium level of output. Okay, so now what will be your aggregate demand at the macro level? It will be nothing but the total planned expenditure. Now, since we are at the moment restricting our discussion to a two-sector economy, who would be the people who would be the representatives in a two-sector economy to spend money? One will be money spent towards consumer goods, and the other will be money spent on investment goods, which is your capital-related expenditures. Okay. So you have the planned aggregate demand for consumer goods ex ante, and again planned aggregate demand for investment goods, which is ex ante aggregate demand. Now aggregate demand AD is equal to C plus I, which is consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure. Okay. Now please remember, students, that since we are now discussing this concept relating to short run and not long run, it is assumed that the investment expenditure will be held constant in the short run. Okay, because one, we have also understood that investment expenditure is considered or assumed to be autonomous, not dependent upon the level of income and the rate of interest, which is what we understood a while ago. Correct? So investment expenditure, though, is supposed to impact your aggregate demand, for the moment is being presumed to be held constant. It's also autonomous. Okay, it's constant because in the short run, the investment expenditure cannot be changed. In the long run, it can be. Okay, so among the two types of expenditure, which are consumption and investment, given the fact that investment expenditure is considered to be constant, then naturally it is consumption expenditure which will actually significantly impact the aggregate demand. Correct? Now, therefore, it is mentioned here that of the two components, consumption expenditure accounts for the highest proportion of GDP. Okay, and the variable I, which is investment expenditure, is assumed to be determined exogenously, meaning outside of the level of income, not impacted by the level of income, the rate of interest, etc. Okay, and constant in the short run. Therefore, in the short run, the aggregate demand function can be written as AD is equal to, okay, C plus I with a dash on top of it. Let's term it as I dash, okay, in my terminology. So aggregate demand will be equal to C, which is consumption expenditure, plus I dash. Okay, and I dash represents constant investment being in the short run. Now, since we have understood that in the short term, because investment expenditure is held to be constant, therefore consumption expenditure is all that basically significantly impacts the level of aggregate demand. Okay, it is now important for us to understand the components of this consumption expenditure. Okay, what are those things that can be tweaked so that the consumption expenditure can be increased? Why would we want to do so? Because we would be interested in trying to increase the aggregate demand. So here we need to understand what determines the amount of this consumption expenditure. And if we need to understand this well, then we certainly will have to turn our attention to try and understand the concept relating to consumption function. So when we talk about consumption function, what is the meaning? It means that consumption is dependent upon, consumption expenditure is dependent upon something. What is that something in your mind, in your viewpoint? It would naturally be the level of income. Now, when we talk about the level of income, will it mean just the level of income, or do you think it will be the level of disposable income? Naturally, it has to be the level of disposable income. For example, if you were to earn 100 rupees as your salary and there is a zero tax, okay, then the entire 100 rupees is available with you to spend. Whereas if 20 rupees is going to be diverted, okay, in the form of tax commitments, then are you not going to be left with only rupees 80? Is this 80 not termed as a disposable income? Can your consumption expenditure now be incurred based on your total income, gross income of rupees 100 or your disposable income of rupees 80? I am sure all of us will agree that it will be the disposable income which will determine the level of consumption expenditure. Therefore, here it is important for you to read that consumption function expresses the functional relationship between aggregate consumption expenditure and aggregate disposable income. So C is equal to F of Y. Capital Y indicates a notation used to indicate the disposable income. Dear students, please remember this very carefully. We are referring to disposable income. If you slip on this or with respect to this point, then a while later in this unit, when we will start discussing about the tax related leakages, there is a very high probability that we will miss out on the on some of the concepts in terms of understanding it appropriately. If you happen to store in your mind clearly that this is disposable income as Y, then when we discussed the tax related aspects a while ago, I am sure you will not register a fault there. Okay, now next to this, we find here in another box another equation given in the form of C, which is consumption expenditure, is equal to A plus BY. Now, what is the significance of this A plus BY? Now, A is held to be constant, and BY obviously means that there is something like a slope. So let us try to invest some time to understand the notations A and B respectively. Now, dear students, let's basically make an assumption. Suppose in a particular family there is no income at all. Okay, the person has been working for let's say 2 years and now suddenly has lost the job. Just because the person in the family has lost the job, who was the earning member, does it mean that no one should feel hungry? Everyone will still continue to feel hungry in the family. Does it mean that they should not consume any food because there is no earning currently in the family? Not at all. So this makes a point very clear to us that irrespective of whether you earn or not, definitely there will be some basic minimum expenditure that will have to be incurred. So you may have to draw down upon your past savings, or possibly you may have to borrow money to sustain your current minimum expenditure and repay it later on when you take up a new job. Correct? So this constant minimum expenditure that you have to incur, irrespective of whether you earn money currently or not, means that it is something which is not determined by the level of your current income. Correct? Irrespective of whether you earn or not, you need to have at least, let's assume, 100 calories of food every day, irrespective of whether you earn or not. Otherwise, it will result in death. So that's what is basically referred to here as A, which means it is something which is an autonomous expenditure. It is not dependent upon your level of income. It is something that has to be incurred as a constant, as a minimum, irrespective of whether you earn or not. Okay. So again, in case you've lost your job, you will incur this expenditure out of your past savings. So your savings will drop exactly by this amount of constant expenditure. Okay, that concept we will use a little later. And now coming to B, why? What does this mean? Now, apart from the minimum amount that you will have to spend, well, does it not also mean that if you continue to earn, okay, apart from the bare minimum expenditure you need to incur to sustain your family, will you not incur expenditure on other items as well? Okay, for example, if you have lost your job, at the moment you may not think of holidaying, you may not think of buying a car, you may not think of buying probably a laptop, but the moment you actually take up a new job, okay, and let's say your salary is going to be now just 20,000 rupees, okay, in the past you were earning 1 lakh. Does it mean that you will think of flying on a vacation to Australia, etc.? You will not want to do it because your level of income doesn't permit it. Now, suppose from 20,000 per month, after 3 months, your salary jumps up to 2 lakhs per month. Don't you think that your level of expenditure will automatically shoot up? Why does it shoot up? It shoots up only because you are now able to afford a higher level of expenditure. So we understand through this example that with regard to consumption expenditure, it could be broken up into two components. One component is basically something that will have to be mandatorily incurred as a minimum, okay, as a constant, irrespective of whether you earn or not. The moment you start earning, you start incurring a level of consumption expenditure which will be dependent on the level of income. Therefore, there is this by in the equation. Okay, so B represents the kind of slope. Okay, now Y of course is the disposable income. So we understand here that if A plus BY represents C and A is held constant, then what can increase the consumption expenditure? The increase can be brought about by increasing B. If B can be increased, then automatically consumption expenditure will increase. What is B? B represents basically the a tendency to spend, correct? Depending on a level of disposable income. Now, when we talk about the tendency to spend, that basically, which is the slope of the function, is what is referred to as marginal propensity to consume provided in your study material, the MPC. Okay, so marginal propensity to consume means the increase in consumption expenditure per unit of increase in disposable income. So if Mr. X income was 10,000 rupees and now he gets a promotion and an increment of 1,000 rupees, we would say that his income has increased by 10%. Okay, now if out of 10,000 rupees he was spending 5,000 rupees every month, now out of that extra 1,000 rupees, if he is going to spend another 500 rupees extra, it means that the marginal propensity to consume is 10% only. Okay, but suppose it is going to drop, okay, whatever will be the percentage is what will be the MPC. Now I said, suppose it is going to drop. Why did I say so? Well, dear students, never ever forget the concept of law of diminishing marginal utility. The more and more you have something, the lesser and lesser will be the worth of it for you. Correct? Now, if, for example, you were earning only 10,000 rupees a month and your monthly expenditure were also, let's say, 9,000 rupees, you hardly save 1,000 rupees. Suppose you get a new job for 15,000. Still, it's a tight position for you, correct? You might increase your expenditure, maybe even up to 13,000, 14,000, whatever be it. Suppose from 15,000 your salary goes up to, let's say, 5 lakhs per month. Does it mean that every day you will keep flying from one place to another place just to burn your money? No. The more and more of money you have, the lesser and lesser will be the value of it for you itself. Correct? The law of diminishing marginal utility. So, why are we discussing that here? It is because the marginal propensity to consume, which is B, obviously in real life is not expected to be 1. Meaning what? If your salary increases by 10%, the incremental expenditure that you will incur on consumption is not expected in real life to go up by 10% itself. It is expected to go up by something which will be lesser than 10%. Though the reason is not explained here, it is because essentially of the application of law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so from a simplicity perspective, the slope or the marginal propensity to consume is maintained as something which is linear in nature. Okay, something which is less than 1. Could be 0.8, could be 0.2, 0.3. Now, here we need to understand it well. Suppose the MPC in the case of Mr. X is 0.2, whereas in the case of Mr. Y is 0.8. What does it mean? Mr. X is less prone to spending more, whereas Mr. Y is prone to a higher extent to spend on consumption. What is the natural implication for us from an understanding perspective? Well, with regard to increasing your national income, the aggregate demand, Mr. X, well, will not be playing a very important role for us. The extent to which Mr. Y plays. Why? Mr. Y is one who spends more money. The more and more you spend, the more and more money remains in circulation. So it basically has a multiplier effect as well. Okay. Now, what we can also think of is, are there ways to probably make Mr. X spend a little more instead of maintaining his MPC at 0.2? If we can try to increase the MPC of Mr. X to 0.4, to that extent it implies that he is consuming more. To that extent the consumption expenditure of Mr. X will increase, naturally will also positively impact your level of national income. Okay, so I hope the point is very clear to you. So MPC can at the most be equal to 1. Well, it will not be 0. Okay, it will be something higher than 0 but less than 1, which is what is depicted here in your study material. The MPC will be well, the increase in consumption will be less than increase in disposable income. So B will be less than 1, which means 0 is less than B, which will be less than 1. Okay, so that's something which is very crucial for us to understand the Keynesian theory of income determination. Now the marginal propensity to consume is explained here, which I have already explained to you. Okay, MPC will be nothing but delta C by delta Y, meaning incremental consumption expenditure per unit of incremental disposable income. So if I am going to be given an increment of 5,000 rupees, delta Y will be 5,000. Out of that extra 5,000, if I'm going to spend only 1,000 rupees as incremental consumption expenditure, then delta C will be 1,000 in the numerator. MPC will be equal to 1,000 divided by 5,000, is equal to 0.2 or 20% will be your MPC. So B will be equal to 0.2. Generally, B is notated, is represented in the form of a decimal. Okay. Now, it's also important to understand the statement. Although the MPC is not necessarily constant for all changes in income, in fact, the MPC tends to decline at higher income levels. Why? Because of the application of your law of diminishing marginal utility. But however, most analysis of consumption generally works with a constant MPC. Okay, that's basically to make the model easy and simple to analyze. Then you have average propensity to consume, which will be what? Your total consumption expenditure divided by your total income. So C is your total consumption expenditure divided by Y, which is your total disposable income, gives you your average propensity to consume. So if you want your average propensity to consume to increase, your marginal propensity to consume must increase at a higher rate. Okay. The table will be self-explanatory. Okay. Then, well, also remember, dear students, that when a person earns a particular level of income, disposable income, either the income will have to be spent on consumption or it will have to be saved. These are the two possibilities. So through this statement, what we understand is if whatever has been earned has to be either spent or if not spent will have to be saved, then naturally, if consumption is a function of income, then naturally savings will also have to be a function of your disposable income only, correct? So thus it is given here that just as consumption, savings is also a function of disposable income, which is S is equal to F of Y. Okay, so we need to be clear about that as well. Okay, then you have the charts that are being given, the consumption and savings function. Please remember that the savings function is a natural corollary of the consumption function. Okay, because whatever has been consumed, if you subtract the amount of consumption expenditure from your total disposable income, the result has got to be compulsorily equal to your savings. Okay, so there is a y-axis and an x-axis. On the y-axis, from a consumption perspective, consumption is measured in the top chart, okay, chart given on the top, and disposable income is measured on the x-axis. With regard to the savings function, disposable income is again measured along the x-axis, savings is measured along the y-axis. Okay. Now, if you look at the consumption function, there is this 45-degree line also that is given, okay, which is y is equal to C plus S. So the disposable income is equal to consumption plus savings. Okay, you also have an intercept A on the y-axis. This A represents your minimum consumption expenditure that will have to be incurred irrespective of whether you earn or not. So your total consumption expenditure will have to start minimum at point A and then move upwards. Now, when you move it upwards, what is the reason it is moving it upwards? Because we understood a while ago, consumption function is equal to C is equal to A plus BY, correct? So, therefore, that is denoted by this particular line in your chart. Okay, then you have the savings function where we notice that, well, if you don't earn anything at the moment and still you have to incur a basic minimum level of expenditure, then that has to be served out of your past savings. So savings will be negative to that extent, exactly to the extent of your A. Something like a minus A will be your saving. And the moment you start earning, automatically you will move away from the minus A closer towards zero, which means, okay, if you spend on consumption all that you earn, then your savings will obviously be zero in your chart here. So the savings line intersects the x-axis, okay, and moves on further. Okay, that's the point at which we find in the chart above that the consumption function line also intersects the y equals c plus line. Okay, now if you look at the top chart carefully, look at point y1. Okay, uh, at that y1 we notice that the line C is equal to A plus BY, the consumption function, intersects the 45-degree line Y is equal to C plus S. Okay, whatever is a disposable income must either be consumed or saved, right? Now, therefore we conclude that when it intersects, the savings basically at that point is zero. Okay, now, can we also understand using this logic? We understand that so long as consumption is going to be higher than your income, then obviously you will be spending more than your income, which means you are dis-saving, correct? And for all those points where your income, disposable income is going to be higher than your consumption, then to that extent you will be saving. That's exactly what is being depicted in the chart above. Okay, all points where you find that your consumption expenditure is above the disposable income line, you will land in the dis-saving zone, and wherever you find that the disposable income is above the consumption expenditure line, there you have a savings. Okay, so that's one thing which is clear to us. So this sentence is also important. Thus, when we represent the theory of the consumption income relationship, it also implicitly establishes the savings income relationship. What is the reason? Reason is disposable income must either be consumed or must be saved. That's the reason why this statement is made here. Then we move on to the marginal propensity to save. Now, what is the meaning of marginal propensity to save? Exactly like your marginal propensity to consume, marginal propensity to save means that the incremental saving that is made for every increase in your level of disposable income. For example, if your disposable income is going to increase by 1000 rupees and you are now going to save 800 rupees out of that 1000 extra rupees, then we say that 800 divided by 1000, 0.8 basically will represent your marginal propensity to save. Okay, well, when we actually say that out of your 1000 rupees extra disposable income which you will now be given, if you are going to save extra 800 rupees, does it not mean that you are spending extra 200 rupees out of the 1000, correct? If from the next month my salary is going to increase by 1000 and I am going to say that I will save extra 800 rupees, does it not mean that naturally that I am going to spend incremental 200 rupees from the next month? When I say I will spend 200 rupees extra from next month, does it not mean that my marginal propensity to consume will be 0.2 because 200 divided by 1000 is 0.2, correct? And we now saw a while ago, marginal propensity to save in our example will be 800 by 1000, which is 0.8. Therefore, can't we now conclude that uh, since marginal propensity to consume is zero point 0.2, okay, and marginal propensity to save is 0.8, and adding the two, which is marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save, which is what? 0.2 plus 0.8 is equal to 1. Okay. Now, is this a coincidence? Well, dear students, this is not a coincidence. Well, MPC plus MPS must be equal to 1. Why? Whatever has been earned as an income will either have to be consumed or saved, correct? Therefore, it is a rule only. Therefore, Marginal propensity to save can also be calculated as follows. 1 minus marginal propensity to consume is equal to marginal propensity to save. Okay. Please remember, since MPC plus MPS is equal to 1, MPS is equal to 1 minus MPC. So what we understand through this is a very significant observation. We understood a while ago that consumption function is equal to A plus BY. A is constant, but BY indicates that consumption expenditure can be increased if B can be increased, meaning if marginal propensity to consume can be increased. Now, if marginal propensity to consume is going to be increased, a natural corollary will be that marginal propensity to save will reduce. Okay, and the lower and lower the marginal propensity to save, the higher and higher will be the multiplier effect, which you will learn a while later. Okay. Please also understand, students, that savings will also be an increasing function of the level of income, because the more and more you earn, what did we learn a while ago? The lesser and lesser will be the tendency to spend at the same rate at which your earning is increasing. Since your MPC is expected to be less than 1, therefore the marginal propensity to save will be expected to increase as you earn more and more. Average propensity to save will be your total savings by total income, disposable income, which is S by capital Y. Now, after having understood the aggregate demand function, let us move on with time to understand the aggregate supply function. Now, what would the aggregate supply represent? It would represent nothing but the plan of the producers in the economy to produce a particular level of output in a particular period of time. Now, when I say produce a particular level of output, can any output be produced in the absence of employment? It is impossible. Unless the labor force is going to be employed, it is not possible to produce an output, correct? Therefore, this national income determination is inextricably linked with the level of employment or unemployment, whichever way you would want to address it. Dear students, observe carefully. Here again, aggregate supply is indicated as ex ante or planned. It is something which is predicted, okay, forecasted. So, aggregate ex ante or planned aggregate supply is the total supply of goods and services which firms in a national economy plan on selling during a specific time period. It is equal to national income of the economy, which is either consumed or saved. Therefore, remember, since whatever is the income that is generated has to be either consumed or saved, therefore AS, which is aggregate supply, is represented as C plus S, which is consumption expenditure plus the savings. Now there are some numerical illustrations given here. I will leave it to you all to do it by yourself on self-study mode and revert to me for doubts if any. Now we move on from there to the official two-sector model of national income determination. Now here we will have to understand the concept relating to leakages injections, as I explained a while ago as well. Leakage basically means that money is being drawn out of circulation. It will no longer be in circulation. Therefore, since it will no longer be in circulation in the economy, it will not multiply. It will go to reduce the velocity of money circulation. Whereas when money stands injected into the system, additional money is now being pumped into the existing level of money in circulation. Therefore, this will actually further multiply, the velocity will increase, and therefore national income will also increase. Okay. Now, we know that equilibrium level of income and output in the Keynesian framework is that level at which aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. So this is the point where AD and AS curves intersect. That's where we say we are at the equilibrium level. And equilibrium level means the level at which the producers plan to produce matches with the consumers' plan to demand for goods and services. Okay. Please again remember, it is not at all essential as per Keynesian approach that equilibrium level of income must be generated only at the natural level of GDP, of real GDP or the full employment level. Please do not forget that. So now we come to this box wherein the aggregate demand was represented as C plus I, the aggregate supply was represented as C plus S. Since equilibrium level is that level at which AD equates to AS, therefore naturally C plus I must be equal to C plus S. And C being cancelled out on either side, I must be equal to S, which means investment must match with savings. Now we all have known that the aggregate demand function basically the aggregate demand curve basically will be upward sloping. Why would it be so? Because the more and more you earn, the more and more you will spend. But then it is important not to forget that though the more and more you earn, the more and more you spend, will you spend at the same rate at which you earn more? Not essentially. Why? Because of what we understood when we talked about marginal propensity to consume and the application of the law of diminishing marginal utility. So you will not tend to spend at the same rate at which you are earning higher. The tendency will naturally drop as you start having more and more of income. Okay. Now, therefore, it is important to read this statement. The aggregate expenditure or the aggregate demand line is flatter than the 45-degree line because as income rises, consumption also increases but by less than the increase in income. So this is where MPC is less than 1. Reason being, again to repeat, application of law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay. Now what is this 45-degree line all about? See, this is a theoretical line that has actually been drawn in your, and presented in your chart. Okay, to help or to facilitate our understanding. In what sense? Now, we all are able to understand one thing that, well, if income increases by 10%, why would consumption also not increase by 10%? Can't we make that assumption? Well, if we were to make that assumption that yes, if your income is going to increase by some percentage, then your expenditure also will increase exactly by the same percentage, which means MPC is equal to 1 is a hypothetical situation, right? Because in real life we know MPC will never be equal to 1. But hypothetically, making an assumption that what if MPC is assumed to be 1, then what you draw will exactly be your 45-degree line where income increases by X percentage, then the expenditure also will increase by corresponding percentage. Okay, which means automatically that hypothetically again producers will be able to know that for all those points on this 45-degree line, okay, it will basically represent equilibrium level of output. Please remember that equilibrium level of output is not something which can be fixed as a constant only at one particular point. It is something which means the level at which your AD and your AS basically intersect. Okay. So now here we try to find out hypothetically on the 45-degree line as a line which represents all those points which represent the equilibrium level of output. Okay. Which is why if you read this sentence in your study material, the 45-degree line illustrates every single point at which planned aggregate expenditure or aggregate demand measured on the y-axis or vertical axis is equal to the planned aggregate production, which is AS, aggregate supply, which is measured on the x or horizontal axis. Okay, so be very clear, it's a hypothetical line. In other words, all points on the 45-degree line indicate that aggregate expenditure is equal to aggregate output, which means C plus I is equal to C plus S. Okay, therefore, this 45-degree line maps out all possible equilibrium income levels. Now, don't forget, dear students, will I always be only on this line? We don't know. The reality might be something which is completely different depending on the level of employment that is prevailing as well. Okay. Does this mean that we will always be only at full employment level? Not at all. Equilibrium income level has actually got no connection with your full employment level. It may coincide with your full employment level if you are extraordinarily lucky. Otherwise, it will, for all practical purposes, remain at a level which will be lesser than your full employment level. Now reading on, see how well it is explained. For all points below the 45-degree line, planned aggregate expenditure, please underline, planned aggregate expenditure or demand is lesser than GDP. Okay, and for all points above the 45-degree line, planned aggregate expenditure is greater than GDP. Okay. So in this chart, we notice that there is this three levels of output which are given: Y1, Y0, Y2. Now Y0 basically represents the level at which equilibrium is basically struck, meaning equilibrium level of output, which means the aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply at this level. And aggregate demand is denoted by C plus I line. Okay, consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure, the aggregate expenditure, and the income line or the aggregate supply line is denoted by C plus S, which is consumption expenditure plus savings. Both of these lines intersect at point E in the chart given, right? Therefore, point E is the equilibrium level of output, and I repeat once again, there is no necessity as per Keynes that the equilibrium level of output must certainly be struck only at full employment level. It can very well occur at below full employment level also, because the point of intersection is determined more based on the views of the producers as well. For example, even though the number of people available to work can be 25 or 23 extra, still the producers will not go on with the activity of hiring them if their sentiments about the market is not going to be positive. If the producers or the business sector feels that the tax initiatives or the infrastructure being provided is not appropriate, then they would not take the initiative of making further investment. Okay, so I repeat, equilibrium level of output need not essentially be struck only at full employment level. Okay, be very clear on that. Now, so YO basically represents the equilibrium level of output where the aggregate demand intersects with the aggregate supply. Now, we also understood what is the significance of the 45-degree line, right? Basically, where MPC equals 1. Now, from an understanding perspective, what will happen if our aggregate expenditure is going to lie above the aggregate supply line, or let's say the above the 45-degree line, or our aggregate expenditure, planned expenditure is going to lie below the 45-degree line. So these are two different combinations that we now need to understand. Okay. Now, here is the 45-degree line traveling in a linear manner, the C plus S line, right? Now let's pick up, for example, a point which is going to lie above the 45-degree line. Let us say it is point A, for example. Okay. Now, what does this point signify? It signifies that point A lies on the line C plus I. Correct? What does C plus I represent? It represents the planned aggregate expenditure. Correct? Now, the aggregate expenditure is represented by two components, a consumption expenditure and an investment expenditure. A quick recap. The investment expenditure is held to be constant in the short run, right? It is autonomous, exogenously determined. Since it is constant, therefore, we notice that the difference, the height between your C plus I line and your C line remains constant throughout the chart. What does this signify? This signifies clearly that C plus I minus C is held constant throughout our analysis. So our initial assumption that I is constant is actually held valid through the depiction in this chart. Okay, so coming back to point A, which lies on C plus I line. Okay, and C plus I line is upward sloping because of the fact that C is equal to A plus BY. Okay, A is constant consumption expenditure. Okay, whereas B is the marginal propensity to consume. That is why the C plus I line is upward sloping. Now, point A, which lies on the total planned aggregate expenditure line, which is C plus I, is lying above the 45-degree line, correct? So what does this indicate? This indicates clearly that the total planned expenditure, the planned aggregate expenditure is above the 45-degree line, meaning the producers were actually expecting something as a demand which was lesser than the actual demand. Now we notice that the planned demand is above the producer's plans. Means what? The producers should be very happy. Why? Because they noticed that the demand is higher than what they thought it would be. Now, whenever the demand outstrips the supply, what do you think the producers would do? They would want to grab the situation. By doing what? By trying to expand further. When you expand further, what is the implication? They will hire more workforce. Correct? Therefore, the level of unemployment is expected to drop. Okay, why? Because producers will now try to produce more. Another reason is when the demand actually is higher than what the producers thought. Imagine what will be the natural fallout. The producers would have thought of actually investing a particular amount in the form of physical inventory. But then now, because the demand far exceeds what the producers thought it would be, does it not mean that consumers are demanding more now? When they demand more, automatically the implication will be the producers' stock of inventory items which they are maintaining will not be sufficient to meet the customer's demands, correct? Therefore, what will happen? There will be an unintended drop in the investment, correct, of inventory. Because if the producer thought that if I just have with me 1,000 packets of biscuit in my inventory list, it will be sufficient to cater to the consumer's demand. But the consumers have started demanding more of that particular biscuit, and therefore to cater to the higher demand, suppliers start supplying more. The inventory of 1,000 will drop to probably 225 packets. Does this not mean that now the supplier is having a shortage of 775 biscuit packets? What should they do to come out of the situation? Naturally, they will now hire more workforce to try to add further to their inventory. Now, when they actually want to produce more, they will have to hire more, which will help us to drop the or control the unemployment rate, and they will move from point A to point E, which will again be your YO level of output, which is the equilibrium level of output. Okay. Now for any point which will be lying below the 45-degree line. For example, Y2 level of output. If this is the level of output at which the producers are at the moment, what do you think will happen? The total planned demand or expenditure is something which will be on C plus I line. Okay, correct? Now C plus I line will be somewhere over here. So the demand is actually something far lesser than the original plan as per the producers. So the producers are now unhappy. The firms are unhappy. Why is it so? Because what they thought would be the demand is not the actual case. It is far lesser than that. Now, since the market is not demanding for the product, what do you think would have happened? The investment that the producer would have made in the inventory would definitely now be higher than what was actually expected, correct, by the market. So this will result in piling up of inventories. Now, since inventories are piling up, what do you think would be the action initiated by the producers? They will actually want to curtail the production by doing what? By probably removing some workforce from their roles and asking them to leave. So this will naturally increase the level of unemployment as well. Okay. Why would they do so? Because they will want to come back again to point E, which will be the equilibrium level at which their plan, meaning producers' plan, will match with the householders' plan as well. Okay, so we find in the chart below corresponding to level of output YO at point E, savings line intersects the investment line. Okay, which means at equilibrium level where the producer's plan matches with the consumer's plan, household's plan, at that level, savings and investment will have to be equal. Okay. Now, if you are not at the YO level, suppose as we discussed at Y1 level, okay, where the demand is higher than the supply, what does it mean actually? It means there that the savings will be lesser than the investments. The planned saving will be lesser than the investments. Now, why is the saving less than the investment? Because since the consumer is spending more than what they thought, what is the natural result? If they spend more than what they thought, will they be saving more than what they thought? No, they will be saving lesser than what they thought. Why are we saying so? Because disposable income is equal to C plus S. It must either be consumed or it must be saved. So the more and more you consume, the lesser and lesser will you save. Therefore, the savings line is appearing below the investment line for all points of aggregate demand which lies above the 45-degree line. Like for example, point A relating to Y1 level of output. And when we come to the Y2 level of output, the aggregate demand point is lesser than is lying lower than the 45-degree line. Therefore, expected consumption is lesser than what it was thought to be, implying naturally that expected savings will be more than the investments. Okay. Now, also remember that since we have been very often repeating the fact that equilibrium level of output need not essentially occur only at the full employment level. Okay, you must also remember very clearly that there is no reason as per Keynes that when we say C plus I is equal to C plus S, that it should perfectly match. Okay, so that's why it is stated here that, however, Keynes held the view that there is no reason to believe that consumers' consumption plan always coincides with producers' production plan, which means your C must be exactly equal, will not occur. And as a natural fallout or a corollary, I need not essentially be equal to S, meaning investments and savings. Therefore, that producers plan to invest matches always with householders plan to save. That also need not essentially match. Putting it differently, there is no reason for C plus I and C plus S to be always equal. From the above chart, it is very important for you to also understand this statement. Okay, as long as the economy is operating at less than its full employment capacity, producers will produce any output along the 45-degree line that they believe purchasers will buy. Okay, that's another very important statement for you to know. Well, the subsequent paragraphs have already been explained to you when I spoke about the Y1 and Y2 levels of output in the chart above. Okay, so I leave this to you to be done on self-study basis. You will be able to understand it clearly. Okay, now we have since C plus S is equal to Y, the national income equilibrium can be written as Y is equal to C plus I. Okay, now here just to understand this box, y is equal to c plus I, which we know. Therefore, y is equal to what? Since we know already that c, which is consumption expenditure, is equal to a plus by, we substitute that in c. So y equals a plus by plus I dash, because I is held constant. Investment expenditure is held constant in the short run. Therefore, y minus by is equal to a plus I dash. Therefore, y will be equal to a plus I dash divided by 1 minus b. Okay, or in other words, y will be equal to 1 by 1 minus b multiplied by a plus I dash. Now remember, dear students, a is something which is autonomous consumption expenditure. I dash is autonomous investment expenditure. So you have the total autonomous expenditure, okay, which is basically divided by the marginal propensity to save. 1 minus B is what? Since B was understood as marginal propensity to consume, 1 minus B is marginal propensity to save. So the national income can also be determined as the autonomous consumption expenditure plus the autonomous investment expenditure divided by marginal propensity to save. Moving on, we note that well, consumption can also be written as a plus by. So substituting the above value of y, c is equal to a plus b into the 1 divided by marginal propensity to save multiplied by the autonomous consumption expenditure plus autonomous investment expenditure. Okay, so that way the consumption expenditure can also be obtained. Well, dear students, a while ago I spoke about what is the meaning of leakage and its impact on the velocity of money in circulation, and the fact that it will go to reduce the velocity of money in circulation, and what is the meaning of injection, and the fact that it will result in increasing the velocity of money in circulation. That's exactly what is explained in this paragraph, and hence I leave it to you to read it. Okay, so we have all these points have been explained to you already. Moving on, in the chart above, I did explain to you that C plus the distance between C plus I here and C is held constant because investment expenditure is assumed to be autonomous and constant in the short run, right? Now, you notice here that without government and foreign trade, the vertical distance between the aggregate demand C plus I and consumption line C in the figure is equal to planned investment spending. Okay, so that's something which you already know. And the fact that at equilibrium level of income, ex ante or planned saving equals ex ante or planned investment. Therefore, S and I intersect and are equal at the level of equilibrium, which was YO level of output. Okay. Now, equilibrium with unemployment or inflation. As we have understood several times in the past, that as per Keynes, the equilibrium level of output need not essentially be struck only at full employment level. We find that something similar is explained here, that an important point to remember is that Keynesian equilibrium with equality of planned aggregate expenditure and output need not take place at full employment. Okay. However, if the aggregate expenditure line intersects the 45-degree line at the level of potential GDP, which we understood right at the start, then there is full employment equilibrium. So it could be a coincidence that your equilibrium level of output is indeed struck at the full employment level itself. Okay, then there will be no recession and unemployment is at the natural rate, because definitely there will be a particular level of unemployment prevailing in any economy, however hard you try to remove unemployment. Okay, but there is no guarantee that the equilibrium will occur at the potential GDP level of output only. So this means that the economy can settle at any equilibrium point which might be higher or lower than the full employment equilibrium. Correct? Because Keynes is repeatedly saying that equilibrium level need not occur only at full employment level. Meaning is it can occur at any other level. So we need to understand what will be happening if it occurs at another level. So let's assume that equilibrium level of output is being, or income is being determined at a level which is lower than the full employment level. Then what does that mean? Demand is deficient or insufficient. So if the aggregate demand is for an amount of output lesser than the full employment level of output, then we say that there is a deficient demand. Okay, so we have a recessionary situation there. And what happens then? Whatever policy initiatives will have to be taken by the government to address recessionary gap will have to be taken, okay, so that employment level is increased, which will naturally going to increase the output as well and the national income also. Now here in this chart, if we assume that there is full employment level, okay, what did we understand earlier on? Full employment level occurs where when it intersects the 45-degree line, aggregate expenditure line intersects the 45-degree line at the level of potential GDP, then there is full employment equilibrium. Students, kindly do not ignore this statement when you look at this chart. Okay. Now here we have OQ star level of output. If OQ star is considered, okay, as the full employment level of output, okay, for the economy to be at full employment equilibrium, what does this mean? If there is equilibrium that is being struck at the full employment level, it means that the aggregate demand curve must intersect the 45-degree line, correct? So here, coming to this chart, one can consider Q star G as the level of, should we consider Q star G as the level of output? Now, if you consider point up to point G, realize that point G is appearing on C plus I line, but it is not intersecting the 45-degree line, and full employment level is obtained when the aggregate demand curve intersects the 45-degree line is what we understood on the previous page here. Correct? Therefore, Q star G cannot represent the ideal output at that level. Now, Q star F is what basically should represent the aggregate demand. So we read this sentence again. OQ star is the full employment level of output in this figure. For the economy to be at full employment equilibrium, the aggregate demand must be Q star F. Okay, that's when it will intersect the 45-degree line and will also lie on the aggregate demand curve. But in reality, if your demand is actually going to be only GQ star or Q star G, then what does it mean? Since point G lies below point F, the actual demand is lesser than what the producers thought it would be, correct? This will naturally imply that they have over invested in inventory because the actual demand is lesser than what they thought it would be. So it's a case of deficient demand. So it results in a recessionary situation. The resulting deflationary gap is FG. Firms will experience unplanned buildup of inventories of unsold goods. And how will they respond? They will respond by cutting production and employment, leading to a decrease in output and income until the underemployment equilibrium is reached at point E here. So at point E, we realize that we are not going to be anywhere near the full employment level. So equilibrium level of output is not being touched at full employment level, correct? Through this chart as well. Look at point E. Point E lies, no doubt, the aggregate demand curve, C plus I, okay? It is also lying on the 45-degree line. That is why it is termed as the equilibrium level of output. But does this actually represent a level of output equal to OQ star? Not essentially. It is only OM, the level of output, correct? So it's not the full employment level of output. It's something lesser than that. Hence, it represents underemployment equilibrium level of output. Okay. So at this rate, your unemployment level or rate would be higher than the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, that's explained in this paragraph. And then the situation of inflationary gap is actually explained. Okay, when your the demand will be in excess of what the producers think it would be. Okay, what do you think will happen in that situation when demand is in excess of what the producers think from a full employment level? See, when the full employment level is denoted as the OQ star level, but if the actual demand is going to be much above or much higher than what you can produce at full employment level, then can you, in the short run, without increasing your capital, etc., can you cater to the increased demand of quantity? Not possible. What will be the result of it? There will be a price rise. Therefore, it will result in an inflationary gap. Okay, and the result will be the real GDP, meaning in quantitative terms, the GDP will not grow, but from a nominal GDP perspective, it will grow because price rise will become inevitable in this situation. Okay. That is why, since Q star represents the full employment level of output and your M point represents something more than your full employment level in terms of demand, which is not possible to achieve in the short run, only hypothetically it will result in a price rise resulting in inflation. That's why we find here at the new equilibrium, which is point E, real output mean quantitative terms, real income and employment will still be the same because you can't increase your employment beyond the full employment capacity. So to repeat, the real output, the real income and the employment will be the same. The nominal output meaning the real output quantity multiplied by the new price, which is the increased price. So the nominal output and income has increased due to inflation. Okay. And again here it is written in the Keynesian model, neither wages nor interest rates will decline in the face of abnormally high unemployment and excess capacity, that they are sticky downward. Okay. And therefore output will remain at less than full employment rate as long as there is insufficient spending in the economy. So Keynes is again coming back to the heart of the discussion that if the spending in the economy is going to be insufficient, then output will definitely remain at less than full employment rate. Okay, so in other words, what he is trying to say is that if you want the unemployment level to drop, you need to improve or enhance the spending tendencies of the public, meaning the marginal propensity to consume. So you try to actually enhance the marginal propensity to consume, thereby creating an inducing effect on your expenditures. Okay, well, with regard to investment also, it can result in increasing the national income. How and how it is done will be looked at a while later. Okay, numerical illustrations, I leave it to you to pick it up, okay, and solve. In case you have doubts, you can always come back to me with your doubts. Now, as we discussed and understood a while earlier, look at the statement, dear students. A steeper aggregate demand function as would be implied by a higher marginal propensity to consume. So if you can try to increase the marginal propensity to consume of a particular of the people at large, then the impact will be that it will result in a higher level of equilibrium income. We all know that y is equal to c plus I. So if we want to increase the national income y, then it can be done either by increasing c or I individually or both. So if you want to hold I constant, which is what is done, then increasing the marginal propensity to consume will help us increase the national income. Similarly, if we hold C constant for a moment, then by increasing the quantum of the autonomous investment expenditure, that can also help us increase the national income. Which is why it is given here, for a given marginal propensity to consume, a higher level of autonomous spending implies a higher equilibrium level of income. Okay. Now, after that, we must understand that now, since we discussed about the fact that if we want to increase national income Y, it can be done either by increasing C or by increasing Y. Okay. This only helps us understand the fact that yes, Y can be increased, national income can be increased by increasing only C or by increasing only I, okay, or by both. Now, if we want to know by increasing I by a particular amount, by increasing, I repeat, the autonomous expenditure, investment expenditure by a particular amount, will it result in exactly the same increase in national income, or will it result in a different level of increase in the national income? Okay, I repeat. If the investment expenditure currently is 100 rupees and the national income is 500 rupees, now if we increase the investment expenditure from 100 to 200, will the national income increase from 500 to 600, or will it increase from 500 to possibly 800? We don't know. Meaning, how much of the, to what extent would the quantum of national income differ by if the level of autonomous investment expenditure is altered? If we want to know that, we need to now shift our attention to something else known as the investment multiplier effect. Okay. The concept of investment multiplier is used essentially to understand the extent to which a given increase in the autonomous investment expenditure will result in an increase in the national income. Okay, so if, for example, the autonomous expenditure is increased by 1 rupee, will it result in a 1 rupee increase in national income, or will it result in a 2 rupee increase in national income, or will it result in a 5 rupee increase in national income, is what is explained to us through the investment multiplier effect. Now, if we want to really appreciate this concept, we must definitely have a recap of what we discussed earlier in terms of savings and leakages. It's a very simple concept, dear students. Any leakage basically represents money that is being sucked out of money in circulation, and any money that is not available in circulation cannot be passed on from one person to another person, correct? Therefore, to that extent, it will not multiply. Again, as an example, if I am earning 100 rupees and I save 20 rupees, I am using only 80 rupees to spend money on, then only to the extent of 80 rupees money will get circulated in the economy, correct? To that extent only it will multiply with respect to other people earning this amount of money. But suppose now, though I have 80, suppose a bank is going to lend 25 rupees to me, does it not mean now that I am possessing 105 rupees? Now, can't I actually spend money worth 105? Will the entire 105 not get circulated in the economy? So I hope you understand that a leakage, which was the 20 rupees saved by me, and injection, which was a 25 rupee borrowing made by me, helps us understand the effect that will be had by the multiplier effect on the national income. Okay, that's explained through this chart as well to you. So in this chart, we notice that down below, there is the income and output measured on the x-axis, savings and investment measured on the y-axis. Here we find there are three levels of output, YO, Y1, Y2. YO is a level of equilibrium level of output determined initially, be very careful, based on the initial autonomous investment. Okay, now when this initial autonomous investment, assume that it is equal to 100 rupees. If this initial autonomous investment is now going to be increased from 100 to 300 rupees, so I dash will now become a new I dash. That is what is the revised line which is drawn as the topmost line in your chart here, which I am highlighting. Okay, so which is I plus delta I. So if this is the 300 rupee new line of investment, meaning extra 200 rupees, delta I is 200 rupees has been invested. Now, naturally, your equilibrium level of output will shift from YO to Y1 as you see in the chart above. Why do we say so? Because initially at YO level, point E represents the equilibrium level of output because aggregate demand C plus I line intersects the 45-degree line, correct? Now we notice that when investment is being increased with a delta I and corresponding to output level Y1, it is E dash in the chart, which is the point at which C plus I plus delta I, which is the aggregate planned expenditure, the aggregate demand curve intersects the 45-degree line. So we notice that yes, the national income indeed grows or increases if there is going to be an increase in the level of autonomous expenditure. So this helps us understand the fact that yes, there is an increase, but how much will the increase be by? If you need to understand that, then we need to know that K, which is the investment multiplier denoted as K, is equal to delta Y by delta I. So the increase in national income divided by increase in the level of autonomous expenditure. Meaning what? If I give you an example, suppose I increased my autonomous expenditure by 200 rupees from 100 to 200, and therefore my national income has increased from, let us say, 1000 to 2000, then the national income is increased by 1000 rupees, correct? So delta Y will be 1000 in the numerator, delta I will be 200 rupees in the denominator. So 1000 rupees divided by 2000 rupees, the multiplier, investment multiplier K will be equal to 5, meaning for every rupee, for every extra rupee of investment being made in the economy, it will result in an increase in the national income by rupees 5. So if you invest 10 lakh additional money in the form of autonomous investment, your national income is expected to grow by rupees 50 lakhs. Okay. Now, as I said a while ago, if I have 100 rupees out of which I save, let me leave the saving example. If I earn 100 rupees and I spend 100 rupees, it will reach another person. Okay, that person will again spend some money. The other person will spend some money. So it keeps moving on. Okay. Uh, every person does not spend all that they have, correct? So there will be a tendency to save as well. Now, the size of the investment multiplier can be determined, meaning K can be determined as equal to, okay, 1 divided by 1 minus MPC, which means 1 divided by marginal propensity to save. So if someone were to tell us that marginal propensity to save is equal to 0.2, then the size of the investment multiplier will be 1 divided by 0.2 is equal to 5 times. Okay, so this clearly indicates that if one can enhance the marginal propensity to consume, if you can make a person spend more and more, then obviously the savings, the marginal propensity to save will reduce. The lower and lower the marginal propensity to save, the higher and higher will be, or the greater and greater will be the size of the investment multiplier. Okay, it's natural, because if I say lower and lower the MPS, it means higher and higher the MPC. More and more you spend, naturally higher and higher will be the tendency for the national income to grow, because the investment size, multiplier size will increase. Okay. Now you must also remember that, well, when we discuss this 1 divided by MPS, later on when we start discussing about the leakages relating to taxation, relating to imports and exports in 3-4 sector models respectively, then we will have to adjust this 1 divided by 1 minus MPC accordingly or appropriately to suit taxation related leakages or import related leakages. Please do not forget this very important point. Okay. Now after this, there are some illustrations which are given, which I leave it to you to solve. Okay, and then we touch the determination of equilibrium income in 3-sector model. Okay, these concepts we will pick up in the next session. So with this is CA MS Swaminathan signing off for the day. Wishing you good luck. In case you have any queries, do not hesitate to reach me at 9444 642613. Thank you. Bye.